A new recruiter gets burned out a lot of times because they get a lot of no's. You know, a lot of people, they call up and they say, hey, I have this great position, I want to talk to you. No, I'm not interested, right? So, or you do a lot of cold calling around trying to find people and talk to them. No, I'm happy. And so then you start to kind of spin it around and say, I know you're happy. I know you're very happy. You know, I'm not even calling for you. And people go, oh, wait a second, you're not calling for, you build a relationship. You know, long-term recruiting, it's all about relationships. It's all about presence in the market.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development. So we are here today with Pete Joniec, the co-founder of the Jonus Group. The Jonus Group is a multi-million-dollar recruiting firm with, they focus on the insurance industry. And Pete, for people who don't know who you are, why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself and your business?
Yeah, just as you said, so I co-founded the Jonus Group. We specialize in placing insurance professionals throughout the United States. Started in 2012, so we just passed our 13 years. I, along with my partner, Gene Nussbaum, we founded the company, grew the company, and a year ago, we actually brought a CEO. He was our chief sales officer, great gentleman. We made him the CEO, and he kind of took over the day-to-day operations of the Jonus Group at that point.
So you finally got out of that seat, took that hat off, gave it to somebody else. That's a big step. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a big step, and he's doing an excellent job at this point, and you know, it freed us up. So we've been looking at other things, talking to other businesses and investments, and just considering other options at this point to continue to either help grow the firm or do other things on our own.
That's awesome. Well, why don't you take us back to the beginning? Can you tell me, what did you originally go to school for, and what were your plans for your career?
Well, I can go all the way back. I don't know how far back you want to go, but so I was in the Navy prior to school, and I joined the Navy. Decided on going into the Navy when I was in 10th grade. So in 10th grade, my mom basically said, hey, we don't have school money for you to go to college. So when she said that, I said, okay, I'm going to go in the Army. I thought I was going to go in the Army. So I went up, talked to a bunch of different recruiters, and the Army really sold me. They had me. But I was too young to sign, so I went home. My dad said, nah, you're going to talk to all the services before you make a decision, because he was in the Army himself, and my brother was in the Army. So in 10th grade, I remember February 10th, I went to MEPS and signed up and did everything. So from 10th grade on, I was signed up to go in the Navy. So went in the Navy because I didn't have money to go to school. So I was like, I'm going to go in, get the GI Bill, and grow up a little bit. Went in the Navy as a machinist mate, so I basically was a boiler technician on the USS Kitty Hawk, which is an aircraft carrier that's no longer in existence. Did 4 years, traveled the world, all over Southeast Asia. It was a phenomenal experience. Got out of there, didn't know what I wanted to do. Went to bartending school first, which was like a week. It was more fun. I didn't know what I was doing. And then after that, I went to Computer Learning Center at the time was a big thing. So for network technology, so I did 7 months there. Got out, did a few different jobs in help desk for Oki Data printers, and then I got a job at Comcast. Worked at Comcast, and at that point, I decided to go back to school. So I worked full time and went to school full time. Started out community college, first as I wanted to go in computer science. Then I took my first programming class and found out that wasn't for me. It just sitting there coding was not for me. Got into general business, finished out my associates at community, went over to Temple. When I got to Temple, I originally was going to go for law or just general business. And I talked to one of the college administrators, and I said, look, you have excellent grades. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm thinking about law. They said, okay, have you thought about risk management? And I said, no. They said, do you know anything about risk management? I said, well, I know it's insurance. They said, well, it's one of the top programs we have here at Temple. and you have to take it anyway. The first course is like a 001 course anyway, as part of the general business electives. So when you take it, but you have to be invited into it, So I said, okay. So I took it. I did really well in it, and wound up going through the risk management track. So I did that, got a degree in risk management, graduated, and didn't even go into it. I went up working with a friend for a little while, for about 6 months or 7 months after, and then got into recruiting.
Yeah. So you had that insurance background that you applied to your recruiting career.
Yeah, what happened is I got into staffing and recruiting in 2006, 2007. So for the first 3 years, I worked at a firm that was more of a generalist firm. So it was a firm that we took any job that we could find. So the firm built itself as specializing in engineering and manufacturing. And we did a lot of those jobs, a lot of production jobs for food manufacturers, a lot of construction engineers and things like that. But also I did like medical assistants, placed a lot of medical assistants. I placed a pharmacist throughout the United States. I placed a lot of people doing mechanical engineering with medical devices and stuff like that. So we did kind of anything, any job that would have come in. But in doing that for those 3 years, there wasn't a lot of training, if any. There wasn't really much training at all. There wasn't any direction. It was the owner of that firm at the point was like, just make money. Any way you can just make money. But what you come to find is, especially early on in recruiting, you want to jump around and have the freedom and all that. It's just not an efficient way to work. And if nobody's really pointing you and saying, hey, this isn't, you're not really going to get the most out of it, because you might place a person in one position. When you're working that position, you uncover a bunch of other candidates. If you're not working similar positions within that local marketplace, especially at that time because there was no remote positions, if you're not working other positions in that local marketplace, then those other candidates that you've come in contact with and built relationships with, you can't do anything for them. So you're placing one person here, and then you're jumping and you're just recreating over and over the work you have to do. It's not an efficient way to work at all. So you kind of realize that, like, okay, I got to get into more of a specialized type of role. So I started looking at that point, and I found an ad that said insurance recruiter. So I put my resume in and didn't get a response back. And it was kind of funny. No response back. And I'm like, I don't get this. I don't understand. I worked for 3 years in recruiting and got recruiting. I got an insurance background. I got a risk management degree. Why aren't they calling me back? So I called up, like a recruiter, being a recruiter, you get very, sales focused, very aggressive as far as like, nobody's going to tell me no. I'm not accepting, you got to give me a reason. I'm going to get past gatekeepers, everything else. So I call up. I'm like, who's in charge of insurance recruiting? They said, well, Gene Nussbaum. So I said, okay. Gene answers the phone. I introduced myself. I said, Gene, sent my resume in, didn't get a response. Here's my background. I'm trying to understand how we can have a conversation. And he said, all those resumes go to an inbox, for one of the owners or admins, and they throw them over to me as they get them. He said, so I haven't even seen it. He said, can you send me your resume? Send it over. He goes, why don't you come in and have a conversation? So I did, and we sat and talked for, it's funny, we sat and talked for quite a while, not realizing that, one day we're going to be business partners. So we're sitting there having a conversation, and then they offered me the job, and I went to work under Gene.
So yeah, tell me about how that relationship with Gene went from coworkers to business partners.
So we worked together. So Gene was he was the top, I'm pretty sure he was the top biller at that point when I got to that firm. And so I saw how Gene worked, and Gene was he's about 15 years older than me, right? So I see this guy who's 15 years older than me, and he's grinding. Like, he's just grinding. He's just working, early, night, everything, and that's how I had the mentality. I always had the mentality where it was like, pick up the phone and just make it happen. and learn along the way and spend the hours doing it. You can out hustle most, and if you have that mentality of just working, everything else you can learn along the way. So I'm watching him, and he's just putting in the time, and I'm putting in the time, and I had started billing very well, and working with him hand in hand. At that point, we were the only two in that firm doing insurance recruiting. They had brought Gene over to start the insurance division and do it because he had been doing insurance recruiting for about 25 years at that point. So they brought him over to do it. So the firm was specialized in accounting and finance. So Gene's sitting there doing insurance recruiting. I'm working insurance recruiting with him. So we're just working, and nobody else knows really what we're making a lot of money, but nobody else knows really what we're doing. They don't know the jobs we're working or anything else. So we're making a lot of money, and it got to a point where it's funny. I was sitting there. I remember going home, and I was like, wow, this guy, he's really got it. But I don't know if he'll leave. And I said, wow, I could see us basically going and doing this. I knew I could set up the network and do all the IT stuff and the computers and everything else. I wanted to go out and start a business. So I was like, but I was deathly afraid of approaching him, because I said, all right, if I approach him, and I remember talking to my wife at the time and saying, I can approach him, but I think he's good friends with one of the owners. And if he goes in and he says, hey, this guy's looking to leave, I could be done. And at that point, I had 2 young kids. It was, money was pretty tight. So this was a big gamble. So for months, I sat there. I was like, how can I approach him? How can I go up in a way and say, hey, and roll the dice without it blowing up in my face? So funny enough, I was at a summer party for the company, and we're out having a great time. And Gene didn't come. He was working. He stayed back and worked, as he did. And it was after went to a Phillies game. After the Phillies game, I was sitting at a bar with one of the guys there, Bill. And Bill goes, "Why are you and Gene here?" And right there, it was like, there it is. So, because I knew Gene would be like, "Hey, how was the party?" And so I said, there it is. So I said, the party was great. I said, I sat there and I was talking to Bill. Bill said the funniest thing. And he said, what was that? I said, Bill said, why are we here? And he said, I said, and he just asked, he said, why are we here? Why aren't we doing ourselves? And I just waited to look and see his face. And he goes, Bill might be on to something. I said, oh, and that created the conversation for, hey, did you ever think about, would you? And then we went from there.
So you were kind of like daydreaming about working with him ahead of that. Was there any kind of a map of what you wanted the business to look like? Like, oh, I could work on this while Gene's doing this? Or were you just, I know I like this guy's work ethic and I want to work with him?
Yeah. It wasn't mapped out to who was going to do what. But Gene originally started out in accounting. So for 4 years, I think it was roughly 4 years, he was an accountant, right? And he was very financially savvy. I mean, he outside of the business, he owned multiple real estate properties and has, and worked in that world too. So he had the financial savviness, he had the knowledge and the hustle. So I knew that, but as far as laying out exactly what we were going to do, no. I mean, even when he said, let's do it, there was it was probably about 6 months, probably about 6 months from when we agreed to do it to leaving, because my wife at the time was pregnant with my third child, Grace, and I wanted to wait until Grace was born because I was afraid that I was going to have insurance. So I was like, I'm going to wait until Grace is born. So even up until that time, we were coming up with the name of the company, and we were talking to an attorney, doing the operating agreement, doing all this stuff. But all that time, I was still like nervous. I was like, oh man, he could walk away at any point. He could walk. And then even up to the day that we left and we went and sat in front of the owner and we were talking to the owner of the firm, she's like, wait a second, let me see what we can do. Let me talk to the other owners. And I was like, oh man, I hope he doesn't change course. I hope we're really dialed in here, because by that time we had a shared office space that we had rented and all this stuff. Like, but I was just afraid. Like, I was, so I didn't have thoughts of what we were each going to do. I was just like, let us get out the door. Hopefully we can leave and really get this venture started, and then we'll figure it out from there. But in my mind, like I always did, like I had the IT background and stuff like that, and he had the finance and accounting, so that kind of fell into place early on of who was going to do what.
And you guys had your place picked out already before you even had like put in your notice?
Yeah. Well, we did shared space because it was only for the first year it was just us. We knew it was just going to be us. So we went to a firm that did shared space, and we each got our own office, and did shared space for the first year.
Yeah. So tell me about that first year. What did your business look like when you first jumped in? It's just the two of you. What did it look like at that point?
Make money. You know you don't have any income coming in at that point. Especially in that world too, you can't touch any existing customers or the marketplace that you were in. So everything that we were doing had to be new customers, new clients outside the market we were used to. So it was jump in and start just making phone calls, introduce yourself, getting candidates in the market, talking to them, just working the marketplace, a new marketplace. So
does that mean not insurance? Is that what
it was insurance, but it was insurance in New York, upstate New York. It was insurance down south. And so, you're looking at Atlanta, Georgia, Washington, D.C., like things like that. So you're jumping outside of the marketplace that you were in.
Okay.
For that first year, it was just grind. You're working as many hours as you can, trying to create as much revenue as fast as possible.
And as the two-man team, did you guys have like different set roles that you were focusing on?
We wouldn't focus on the same markets at the same time. Like I think I was doing upstate New York at the time that he was doing DC and Virginia and Maryland at that point. So that's the way we were working, and it was just trying to find jobs, trying to find clients who would give us jobs at that point, talking to candidates. So you're just trying to establish yourself new. And anytime you're doing that, it's going to take a little ramp up period. No matter how much it's going to take a little ramp up period of getting to know the clients in the market that are going to work with staffing firms, and then providing them the types of people which you don't have a database on at that point. So it's all brand new.
Just for reference, what is the workflow of a recruiting campaign process? Like, what does that look like?
So as far as you want to establish what clients are in the marketplace. So in our world, it's the agents and brokers in the marketplace. So you establish who are all the agents and brokers in the marketplace. Two, you want to find out which ones are going to work with recruiters. But a lot of times also that comes through reaching out to them, introducing them to candidates that they might be interested in speaking with. So even though you might have clients, potential clients that say, we don't work with recruiters, in that world, there's a 99% would always say, if you have a great producer, someone that's going to generate revenue, we want to talk to them, regardless if we'll pay fees or not. If you have a great producer, we'll pay a fee for that. So, and that's what blew open the market for us in the DC, Maryland market. Is we had an ad posted for producers. Guy responded, excellent producer, which sometimes like you look at like how things work out. And I've posted so many ads for producers and never got like a really, this guy came, he was a phenomenal producer. And we had called and introduced his profile to all these companies. We had several companies that wanted to talk to him. He was made 3 offers. Like he opened up the market. And then at that point, once you open up the market, you have clients then go, okay, since you found that, do you have account managers? Do you like it starts to really, and then once you have account managers and you talk to them and you talk to other clients, then you kind of open up the market. And now I'm just talking about the insurance world, but you can do the same thing in basically any marketplace. Once you identify who's going to hire these people, then you start to talk to the candidates, and you start to build the marketplace.
Do you keep bringing these producers to the same companies, or you kind of build up a large region of companies that are all that they understand your reputation is that you can find these good producers?
You can find and identify the right people, that type of profile. Of course, you're going to place someone, so they're going to stay there at that company. So at that point, you're going to ask, do you have any referrals? Do you know anybody else that's like you that I might want to have a conversation with, right? So, and a lot of times within any employment marketplace, it's not if, it's when. There's a lot of people that will always say, and a new recruiter gets burned out a lot of times because they get a lot of no's. A lot of people, they call up and they say, hey, I have this great position, I want to talk to you. No, I'm not interested, right? So, or you do a lot of cold calling around trying to find people and talk to them. No, I'm happy. And so then you start to kind of spin it around and say, I know you're happy. I know you're very happy. I'm not even calling for you. And people go, oh, wait a second, you're not calling for, you build a relationship. Long-term recruiting, it's all about relationships. It's all about presence in the market. So the presence you can build in a marketplace, and that people know that's what you specialize in, and that you're coming to them for the right things. I'm not calling you on every certain thing, but I might ask you, okay, big picture. If there was ever a position that you would really look at, what would that look like? What would the commute be? Especially at that time, it would be commute. Now a lot of things are remote. But what would the commute be? What would the title be? What would the salary be? So now you give me now I'm bringing that to you. Now when I bring that to you, you're more prone to listen. Mm-hmm. So it's just building the knowledge of the marketplace, building a very detailed and informed database. Like when I talk to you and we have the conversation, I'm noting that down. And I'm remembering that. And another thing recruiters do sometimes is they work too big a market. So if I work too big a market and you tell me that and I'm talking to thousands of people, I'm not going to remember that. So it's a market that's big enough that I can get to know as many people as possible and they can get to know me. So that way, when you're ready to look, you say, you know what, Pete called me a couple times, not with any nonsense. He called me with the right things, the right time, good conversation, respect it. How I decided to communicate with them, and you're more prone to reach out to me then, or more prone when your colleagues say, I'm not happy, I'm looking, do you know anybody, to then reach out as well.
So that first year after you had kind of got your database and things set, how did you begin to start scaling the business, and what was the next steps in growth for you guys?
Well, at that point, the first person we hired was someone we had worked with prior to. And I knew this gentleman had a good background in insurance, and he also was a good recruiter, but he just wasn't getting the support. So I reached out to him and said, hey, would you like to come join us? We started this firm, and he knew how we worked, and he joined us. So that was the first hire. And then after that, we had posted ads. And since then, I just had the mentality, we're always going to have ads up for recruiters. I always want to be talking to people. And originally, you got to learn the hard way. Originally, my mentality was, if you're a salesperson or you're in insurance in sales, I can train you to be a recruiter. That was just my mentality. It was a very hard-headed, thick-headed mentality, but it was if you want to spend the time on the phone, I'll train you to be a recruiter. And we were just bringing people in, and we would find people in insurance that were producers that didn't want to do that anymore. We would find people that would do other types of sales and wanted to make the transition. So we would just talk to any and everybody. We didn't have a specific profile at that point.
And how many people were you hiring a year? Because this was only back in 2012 that you started the business?
So 2012, it was just me and Gene. In 2013, we had moved from the shared space into about a 1,500 square foot office. So, and it's kind of funny. We moved into this office. It was 1,500 square feet. So it was relatively small. So we had the office furniture, the commercial furniture guy come in, and he's like, look, I can come measure your office and tell you what will fit. So he comes in, he measures, and he goes, okay. He goes, you can fit about 5 cubicles in here, 8 by 8. So, and I'm like, 5 cubicles? We're gonna fill those up He goes, I can get creative, and I can fit 9 in here. He said, but they're going to be, tight. And I said, no, fit 9 in. We got to, because I was like, if people want to come and work and they want to make as much money as they possibly can, then we're going to make it happen. So he put 9 in there, and it got tight. I mean, we literally had people backing up against each other, and but it was like, I knew 5 would have never lasted. So we filled that space up relatively quick. And then I remember talking to Gene at a Christmas party. I think it was that next year. So like we were at capacity, and you sign a commercial lease, you're in for, I think it's 5 years at that point. I think it was 5 years, 3 years, 5 years. So I said to Gene, I said, okay, so we had this small conference room. It was very small. It was a little table that could fit maybe about 6 chairs around it. So I said to Gene, okay. I said, I'm going to take the conference room table apart. And I think I could fit, I just had in my mind these white desks, these white tables from IKEA. Mm-hmm. I was like, I can fit 3 of those in there. And he's like, what? So I said, hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to, so I took the conference room table apart and threw it in the closet, went to IKEA, got 3 of these tables. He's like, who's going to sit in here? I said, the same people that sat out there. So I asked some of my guys who were already there, hey, would you mind moving in here? They called it the ice box because it was like very cold in there, and you got 3 guys, grown men, sitting in these things. It was not the best, but to their credit, they stayed there. It was very close to. I mean, to be on the phones all day, it's very, it's a very close environment to sit in. So, things happen along the way, and you kind of luck out because at that point we're doing that, and you could see the stress is picking up, and by the grace of God, I'll call it, the next door to us, there was this, how big was it? About 5,000 square foot space. And the company there was downsizing at that point. They just didn't need the space. So they didn't need the space, and they wanted to get out of their lease. So we cut a deal where we agreed to take the space over, and they would be released of their lease. So just by the grace of that happening, we were able to just move across the hall and build that out and expand. And that offered room for about 32, I think it was about 32 people at that, with regular size cubicles. Yeah, so everybody got there.
Did you keep that old space too?
No, we also got to move on from that space. I mean, they allowed us to upgrade to the space. So it was a good business decision because at that point we moved into the 32 person space, and then we continued to expand to the point where we took on another space that had laid dormant for about 15 years that was across the hall. So it wasn't the best having this big hallway in between the 2 spaces, but we didn't care. It worked out.
So you have all these people coming in a relatively short period of time. How did you make sure that the quality of your work was maintained with all these new hires coming on?
Yeah, that's, in the beginning, as you grow, it took me a while to learn to, I mean, as you're growing, you think you can do everything. Like you think you can do everything. And, hindsight being 2020, it would have been, you want to say, looking back is always easy to say, I would have did this and that. But in what you never reflect truly on is, it's easy to look back and say what you might have done, but there's also a lot going on in your world at that point that you just don't remember, right? And so we were trying to grow and put people in positions of management. So we'd grab top billers and put them in positions of management, and and trust them to train. And so you're growing, and then revenue continues to come in and grow because the market's so hot at that point. So you're put people in place that are billing, and new recruiters who are making money, who in a tight market, probably are not as effective as they should be. So, but everything's going, the revenue's growing, the people are growing, success. But at that point, you do grow too fast, where you have to now put training in place. You now have to start putting a lot more structure in place, a lot of processes and everything else. So that's something where, and eventually, and we had a conversation. Eventually, I joined, implemented EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System. And they say that should be put in place before you hit 50 people and so much revenue. We were over 50 people. So there's a lot you had to do, to go back and start putting processes in place and more structure in place and everything else, which when we did, then you see more growth come. So I would certainly encourage, as you're moving along, to try to put those structures and things in place. But I do recognize that, especially, it's not always easy. It's not always easy because, starting a business, you're a chief cook and bottle washer for a long time, and then as you get to a certain point, you eventually have to start pushing those duties off to other people and have a lot of trust. Probably the scariest thing. That's probably the scariest thing is when you go from the key revenue drivers of the organization to then trusting others to do it and trying to train others to do it. It's very unnerving. Very unnerving. Yeah.
So did you guys have a goal for revenue and size? Like, it sounds like you were just going full guns blazing as fast as you could. Were you just, let's see how big we can go? Or was it,
No,
we want to retire when we're 45, 50? Like,
no, originally it was, we knew we wanted to build a company, like a true company. We didn't want to be, there's a lot of single operators out there, or what happens is you see there's a lot of firms that will grow to that first size that we were at, in that 1,500 square foot, and you can make great revenue doing it. You can make it great profit, more money, a ton of money, and be very comfortable with your life, in that with 10 people. You can do that. Perfect. Because after that, in growing, there was a lot of years where my profitability and take home was a lot less than that point. So you look at that, you're like, wow, we could have stayed at 10 and, been fine. However, we always had the mentality, like, we wanted to continue to grow. We wanted to build a business, put the structure in place. We wanted to do something that could offer a lot of people, hundreds of people, the opportunity to change their lives. Because you see that, like, in sales, in recruiting, you see people come in time and again who are, at that point making $27,000 to $30,000, tons of student debt, have tons of dreams, but don't know how to get there. And then in a few short years of successful recruiting, they're paying off their student debt, they're buying their first house, second house, paying for their weddings, like their whole lives are changing. And that is exciting. Seeing people change their lives and their livelihood, especially when they don't know, they're like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do it, or if that's even possible. And then you see them doing it, and that's just awesome. But in the beginning, I remember that first coming into that shared space, and I put $1 million on the board, on in front of me. At that point in 2012. I was like, all right, first million. Like that was it at that point. It was like, just make the first million. But I can't tell you the date when that first million happened. I know it happened a lot sooner than we thought. I know that. I know we hit the first million and we're like, let's keep going, but it wasn't like, all right, 2 million or 10 million or, so I don't have milestones as when we hit these things, but I do specifically remember it was like, first million. And then another thing you start to hear is like things like businesses fail within the first, new businesses within the first 3 years, first 5 years. So you're like, okay, I want to make it past those points, and I want to, continue to grow and continue. So I've never been so dialed in on year over year, what's our revenue, where it's been, is the company progressing? Are we putting things in place? Are we continuing to evolve? Are we continuing to look at new technologies? Are we continuing to improve the internal processes and things that we're doing and bringing in people with a greater knowledge base and stuff like that? So that's how I, yes, you want the revenue to continue to grow. So I'm not saying we've ever took big dips or anything like that, but it's also the core business. What is the business doing, and are we continuing to stay relevant within how the world is changing?
Still, providing a value.
Right.
What size are you guys at now? How many employees are in the group?
About 115 now. 115 throughout the United States. Prior to COVID, so prior to COVID, we were stuck. We were stuck about 55, 60 people. We just could not get over 55 to 60 people because at that point, we would only hire you if you could come to the office, like most employers at that point. And we were in competition with all the other recruiting firms in the area, as well as every other firm that were looking for salespeople. So the market was very, very, very tight. So, and we would get to 55 to 60 people, and you have turnover and everything else, but we could not get above that number. And COVID had happened, and our people for a long time were like, we want to work from home, and we had the capabilities. We had the capabilities for them to work from home, and at that point, they could earn a few days, depending on seniority, how long they had been there. They could earn a few days a month to work from home, but we never had envisioned everybody going to work from home. So we didn't. So COVID happened, and the county came and they basically said you had to shut down the office. So everybody pivoted and worked from home. And it was a very scary time for a lot of employers. You didn't know what was going to go on, how long it was going to go, and what was going to happen. But they had gone home and worked, and they really demonstrated, the team, that we could do this from home. And all along the way, we would always get people submitting their resumes to us from outside the marketplace, but we would never talk to them if they couldn't come to the office. So we said, you know what, now that we're in this environment, me and Gina had a conversation. We said, should we start talking to people in different states? Also we had a conversation and said, look, if we go down this path, there's really no going back. Once you start hiring and all, unless you concentrate hubs of people, right? Unless you're really concentrating and saying, okay, well, I'm going to hire people all in California or Arizona, all in this specific radius, you're not going to have the ability to transition back to, hey, everybody back to the office. You just won't. So it was a big decision at that point to know, like, if we start going down this road, you can't come back in that way. You can't say, hey, everybody back to the office now, even though the rest of the world might be doing that. So we made that decision, and when we made that decision, we went from 50, 60, and 70, 80, and started growing from there.
Size, right?
It opened up.
5 years.
Yeah, it opened up. It really opened up, and there's a lot of bad things that happened in COVID for a lot of families, but this was something that opened our eyes to something that we probably would have never done.
So what is your and Gene's role now that you have a CEO in place, managing and kind of running the vision of the business? What is your guys' role in the business now?
Just high-level strategy. As far as what the company is doing on a quarterly basis and such, or an annual basis. So, but for the most part, it's only strategy in a sense of the CEO bringing to us, what's going on, what he's doing, what he sees, because you learn early on. You have all these ideas, especially in that role when he's the CEO. You might have ideas, but if you're not in a day-to-day, it's not fair to say, oh, let's go do this now, when you're not in a day-to-day, expecting someone to then say, okay, yeah, I'm going to take this, but I also got all these other things that have to be done.
So you kind of look at a mini board of directors, the two.
Yeah. Bounce ideas, high-level strategy. But I've come to the understanding through a lot. Like originally, when you're running a company and doing it, you guys probably running the same thing. You have thousands of ideas, and then if you get into something like EOS, not only do you have ideas, but they're like, let's get all the issues on the board. So you could sit there in a quarterly meeting or an annual meeting, and you go from having your own 30 ideas to now all these issues that got to be, big, small, that have to be accomplished. And you start to realize, like, you're not going to be able to accomplish all this stuff. So then you start to whittle them down. And originally, it's funny in the EOS thing, they tell you, because I think we all come in very, like, stubborn, and we're gonna do them all. It have 3 to 5, have 3 to 5, have 3, and they kind of beat it in your head, and you got to learn, like we all do through life, the hard way. So now the only thing I say, like when Seth comes and I say, all right, I'd rather see you 3 to 5 key things over the course of a quarter than 1,000. Just what are the 3 to 5 things that you can accomplish that moves the business forward? What are the most pressing things that we can get done in 90 days to move the business forward? Because if you do that, then at the end of the year, you have 12 to 15 major things that you got accomplished that now progress the business.
So when talk about strategy, what's one piece of advice that you would give to a business owner who wants to scale quickly?
Be cautious of scaling quickly. Just as I went over, it's not always. It's what are you running toward? Like what are is it? Do you believe that the market's not going to be as hot for so long, and you want to capitalize on the current market because the conditions are so favorable? Is that the reason? We really sit with the reason of wanting to get to that point, because you can scale revenue at that point, but then if you have to go back and then put all processes in place and redo, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work to do that, Also, as you're going along, be more patient with yourself as far as looking and finding the right people to put in place as you go. We had to learn the hard way. Like you always think that a top producer is going to be a great manager. That's not always the case. And they're not motivated a lot of times by the same thing. Top producer, a lot of times, they want to go out and they just want to hunt and find revenue, and that's their drive. And they think a lot of times, oh yeah, I want to build a team. But a lot of times they find they don't want to do that. So it's start to really look at and talk to multiple people that are doing the position that you're looking to hire in the marketplace. Even if you can't afford them up front, talk to them. Get a frame of mind. What are they doing? And make sure that you are truthful with them. Not truthful, but just like upfront with a lot of times you come in contact with higher level people and you'll say, hey, you'll be great in my position at this level. And they sometimes think, yeah, that'll be great. But they're used to working in a much larger environment. So there is a transition period to come in and do it. And sometimes you have people that come and they go, oh, this ain't for me, because they're used to working in a bigger environment, have access to a lot more resources and everything else. So, find the people at each level that are you at an entrepreneurial level? Bring those entrepreneurial people in. As you scale up, bring people at those levels, or at least make sure you're talking to people at those levels. Be patient with your hiring. A lot of times you might rush it. Talk to a few people that are doing the position, 3 to 5, especially if it's not a void you have to fill immediately. If there's that's a different time. If you have a void that you need to fill immediately, that's a different instance. But there's a lot of times I think, as an entrepreneur, you have a lot of pressure on yourself. You have a lot going on. And so it's hard to pull back. So, they talk about that a lot too, is set time aside for yourself. Without family, it's just some time that you can decompress and start and try to look at the business in a bigger fashion. Because when you're in the weeds and you're just in it day to day, it's hard to pull back and really look at the business, the needs of the business, and what the next step is that you need, and putting those things into place.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. If somebody wants to get a hold of the Jonus Group or get a hold of you, what's the best way they can do that?
Join us at thejonusgroup.com, and they can look me up. They can reach out to me at Joniec@jonusgroup.com, and they can look up the company at jonusgroup.com. So.
Awesome. Well, we have one more episode coming up with Pete, but thank you again for coming out.
All right. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.